Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek The Next Generation Season 6 Episode 22. It is called Suspicions. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. This is a Beverly Crusher episode. She is the central figure of what is effectively a murder mystery once it gets going. But it's set up with a bit of a... Well, I can't really quite call it a bookend, because the bookend kind of ends like just over halfway through the episode, then it continues from there. But it opens with her going to Guinan, or Guinan coming to her, and her relaying the story of why she's seemingly in trouble and going to a tribunal for something, and why she's been taken off active duty. And then it goes into a whole plot about this experimental shield technology that would let ships actually travel somewhat into a star. You know, I don't know if they ever specified exactly how far, but they could go actually into the sort of the atmosphere of the star, effectively. I don't even know if atmosphere is the right word, but it's a star, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, closer than normal.
Yeah, inside it's, you know, it's heat and gases and whatnot. So, anywho, that is the basic gist of the episode. How did you find this one, Connor?
Well, it's good that it's not another romance episode for Crusher.
That sounds like a caveat, or a...
Yeah, it's just still not very good. I think especially the first half, where it's her relaying the story, and it's got this vibe of it trying to be a noir, like with the narration, and I just think it really doesn't come off very well. Do you know what it reminds me of? The version of Blade Runner with the narration, where it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think there's individual moments that are not bad. Like, it was kind of nice seeing her. At one point, she gets mad at Guinan, and she kind of like snaps at her. And I was like, oh, that was interesting, because I don't think I've ever seen her.
Yeah, it's definitely not all terrible.
Yeah, I've never seen her talk to someone like that before, so that was actually kind of an interesting little moment. But I kind of agree that I think ultimately the story as she's telling it is just a little bit dull. Like, there's not really much going on that makes it exciting up front.
And let's say, I think the first half, the problem was the noir style narration kind of fell off. But then by the time it gets out of that, it's quite far into the episode, and I'm not invested in it. And it just it's hard to really... I think the second half is better, but it's hard to get back into the episode at that point.
Yeah, I think another problem I had with it as well is that, and this is just this is something that pops up from time to time, where it feels like the solution to the episode somehow solves all the problems when I don't feel like it should. So her big thing in this episode is where she gets into trouble because a Ferengi dies, and she thinks it's a murder. She thinks it's staged to look like a suicide, and she wants to do an autopsy, which makes sense. But Picard informs her she can't do that because of Ferengi beliefs. They don't want anyone touching the body. They want to do their death ritual, so no autopsy, you're not allowed. And after a little bit of an investigation, just talking to other people who might either be witnesses or suspects or know of a motive or whatever, she basically just decides to do the autopsy anyway. And I get to an extent why that's a character decision she's making. She's making a choice to like break the rules and do it because she believes that much that it was a murder. And she goes and tells Picard, I did this, right? All fair enough. And almost like a classic noir detective story, her badge is taken away, she's thrown off the case, so therefore she might have a chance of solving it now, right? You can almost see the tropes just from a slightly different profession just bleeding in. That's all fine.
They really are there, yeah.
But at the end of the episode, after she proves that everything that's going on, we'll get into all the details later.
It was a murder after all.
Yeah, it was a murder. She helps take out the bad guy, and everyone realizes that she in fact was right. She just sort of casually mentions in her next star log, oh, I've been reinstated. And I thought, but you still, the thing you did that got you in trouble is that you broke an order, right? You disobeyed an order and did the autopsy, which not only was this disobeying an order, but it was specifically interfering with another culture's ritual or their customs, which is obviously a big no-no in Starfleet.
Yeah.
She still did that.
Yeah, just because she was right doesn't mean that she was suddenly allowed to do the autopsy. Because the Ferengi weren't saying, no, don't do the autopsy because we don't believe it was a murder. We don't believe there's any case of that. It's just, we don't want the body touched and interfered with before we do our rituals.
I mean, from the sounds of it, they practically said, we don't care if it was a murder. Don't touch the body.
That's very Ferengi, let's be honest.
It's very Ferengi.
There's no money involved, so...
I mean, there was some interesting stuff in the setup, just in the sense of this is a Ferengi scientist who's like developed this tech. Even it says at one point the idea of a Ferengi scientist is also almost a little bit of an oxymoron in and of itself, and knows that there's a bit of prejudice because of how Ferengi are. And to be fair, everything you've seen of the Ferengi kind of backs up why people would assume that a Ferengi wouldn't do something like this. But he's very passionate about it. He really wants to prove that everything is going to work. And this other alien, so there's like 4 scientists are there in total. Crusher's acting like an ambassador between this Ferengi guy and the other scientists who are from different species. There's a Vulcan scientist, and then the other guy whose species I'm not immediately familiar with, but he's there too. And it's him that goes out and drives the shuttle with this shielding tech on it, and he seemingly dies. And it confuses everyone. It seemed to be going well. Like, why is the shield failed? And you know, the big twist of the episode later on is that he's actually the killer. He actually faked his death because his species can make his body look like it's dead, but he actually killed the Ferengi, and he tries to kill Beverly, and Beverly fights back. And there's a cool little moment actually when she fires the phaser the first time, and it literally makes a hole in his body, and he keeps coming at her.
She turns it up and just turns him to dust, basically.
Yeah, which I think she's fairly justified because he's clearly still coming to hurt her even after that first blast.
I mean, it's safe to assume the phaser was not set to stun in the first place.
Yes,
because it put a hole in him. I'm not saying it should have been. I'm saying he was clearly attacking her. He was clearly trying to kill her in a confined space. There was no backup inside. There was no other scenario. She's defending herself. It
was about as justifiable as a phaser at full blast as you can have.
It was just funny that you assume it's at full blast because it's clearly on the lethal setting, and then it's just like, nope, that's not enough. Keep going.
Yeah, maybe it was on stun. Maybe like, I don't know. Maybe just because the way his body works, like it made a hole. I don't know.
Maybe it just.
I really do not know. That said, though, it's the phaser. I mean, she took the phaser from him, so. If anything, whatever setting it was on in the first place isn't really on her. She just grabbed the phaser. That, you know, she was in a struggle. She grabbed the phaser because it was him that had it set up. So even if it was on a setting you wouldn't agree with a Starfleet officer using, she didn't do it. It was just that's what it's on. Heat of the moment, you know, whatever. But it's like, oh shit, he's coming at me even though he's got a big hole in his stomach. Never mind. I mean, I say a hole, you can see right through it. It's kind of like the T-1000 except without the liquid metal effect. It's just it's a clean circle, and just
it's kind of a fun visual.
Oh yeah, no, it was one of the most fun moments I had the whole episode, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's that.
Yeah. Hey, I think it's the first time we've seen a phaser put a hole through someone.
I think so too. I do think it's something to do with his physiology, just because he mentions that they can control their cells and stuff. So I wonder if like they effectively. I'm not saying they're literally like an assembly of like nano beings that form a human or a human shape, but given that you can control individual cells, I do wonder if like they all sort of like can function on their own to an extent, and that's why you just have to annihilate the whole thing.
Yeah, even with a whole lot of them, there's still just enough there that it's just like whatever. Not that it'll necessarily regrow, but more just it's non-essential right now.
Yeah. So. I mean, that's a fun enough moment. But, you know, it's, a lot of the episode is Crusher doing the research, talking to Picard, talking to the other scientists, and seeing if they're suspicious or, you know, if they... Because the whole thing is that maybe one of them is trying to discredit the Ferengi so they can go and develop the tech themselves and take the credit for it, kind of thing. So it turns out to be the one who died, just to give us a bit of a...
But essentially for the same reason, in that he's going to just steal the prototype.
Yeah, I mean, the motive was the same, yeah. Oh, there's a Klingon scientist as well. I forgot to mention the Klingon.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was probably the most likely suspect just because Klingons are angry.
I think that's pretty much the way the episode plays it, is you know, Crusher goes to her and she's like, what, you think because I'm Klingon?
Yeah, which... I mean, there's almost an intentional thing there, and maybe it is intentional, because, like, you know, basically the Ferengi earlier on said... You know, I need someone to help me present this to everyone else because no one will trust me because I'm a Ferengi. He's basically saying that he'll be profiled because he's Ferengi. So it is kind of interesting that she goes to the Klingon. And honestly, to criticize the writing of this scene, or maybe to criticize the character rather than the writing if this is just an intentional thing, but she is very accusatory in that scene. She's not just like asking questions very broadly. She's very intentionally kind of provoking the Klingon.
Is she the same with the Vulcan? Because obviously she goes to them as well. Like, I can't remember if she's quite as.
I don't think she is. I think with the Vulcan, she's a lot more kind of neutral. It's very just sort of matter of fact. Whereas with I feel like with the Klingon, she's downright almost like wink wink, like I'm suggesting you did something kind of thing. Like, it really felt like that in the scene a couple of times.
There's a possibility in playing devil's advocate here for a fictional character that doesn't really matter. I think she goes to see the Vulcan first.
Yes.
So she's already ruled out, and the other guy's dead at this point, so he's not really a suspect. So it's just, the Klingon's the last one standing. So
if I was to play devil's advocate, I would say maybe what she's doing in both scenes is she's trying to play to who she's speaking to. So a Vulcan's logical, so she has to present all the debate sort of with reason and just sort of like, here's the holes we have to fill in. You have to agree these holes exist, so therefore let's have this conversation. With the Klingon, it's like, well, they're very passionate and like maybe
let's be aggressive about it, and they'll respond in kind.
Yeah, and maybe she'll slip up if she is guilty, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it could be more of a tactical thing on her part, which I suppose is fair. But it stuck out in my mind because it started with the Ferengi saying, "Oh, no one will believe me," and they don't. They all think, "Oh, this will never work. He's a Ferengi."
Yeah, and like we say, it's kind of fair that the show has established that no one will believe him because the Ferengi are kind of a one-note joke. Let's be honest, even the ones that we like.
I mean, that said, that recent episode of Deep Space Nine with Jake helping Nog to read and like Sisko kind of like addressing his prejudice, I think was a better example of them using Ferengi to sort of acknowledge that there is prejudice and like even the Starfleet characters have to maybe examine themselves and get over it sometimes and realize they're doing it. I thought that was a better example of that. This had potential to do more with it. I think there was something there if they wanted to go down that path, but I don't think it ever really quite did because the Ferengi's killed, too early on for it to, I think that's the moment actually where it felt the most like it was trying to be a noir. Is like when he leaves the room and the narration comes in and she's like, and that was the last time I ever saw him alive. Fade to black for commercial. Like,
It really is playing. It's clearly done intentionally.
Yeah.
But just because it's done intentionally doesn't make it good. It just feels off most of the time where it's doing that.
Yeah, I think is it maybe just like a weird mishmash of like how it like I think you can have this story where it's Beverly who is passionate and believes something bad has happened and there's wrongdoing to be proven. And she goes to investigate it on her own. I think all those things are completely valid things to write for the character, but I think trying to frame it like a noir feels like it's kind of like you get away with it when you're doing a holodeck story because you're literally doing noir visuals and things like that. You maybe get away with it if you're someone like Data who will almost like go into his Sherlock role when he's doing investigations.
It's very much early, like seasons 1, 2, maybe 3 Data story. Yeah. This, except they've kind of transferred it onto Crusher. And again, I say, the story and concept is not bad for her. Just the decision to frame it as a noir.
I also thought it was a little bit strange that after she concludes that she thinks there's something up here, that it's not just a suicide, and she goes to Picard, and this is where he tells her not to do the autopsy. The scene ends with Picard saying, well, you'll have to find evidence outside of an autopsy. And I think it's a little bit strange to me that like his medical officer saying, I think there's been a murder on the ship. It's kind of weird that Picard doesn't offer up either Worf or Riker or someone to be like, okay, we have to investigate this. It shouldn't just be the medical officer doing it. It should actually be ship security or something helping,
Yeah, like, okay, we can't prove this because we can't do an autopsy, so we can't actually say there's been a murder. But maybe we should take it a little bit seriously because she's still a senior officer, right? Regardless, and if she has this thought that it's definitely worth investigating in a different fashion.
And we've seen great examples in the past of Picard taking his like senior officers at their word when they've got a feeling about something, and they usually pan out because they're, it's a TV
Even
show.
here, it's not like he disbelieves her. It's not like he's saying, no, there's no chance this happened. It's more just, well, it's kind of on you to go prove it, but prove it a different way.
Yeah. It felt like I don't know. I feel like it wanted to have her on her own for the noir type of story, but it didn't really make much sense for not to give her like war for someone to be like a buddy.
Yeah. Also, I felt it's a little bit disappointing that she didn't rise to the challenge of finding it a different way. It ultimately boiled down to, well, I'm just going to break the rules and do the autopsy anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the other problem I had with it, is that when she does decide to do the autopsy, I didn't really feel like she'd been driven to the point where she should be willing to break that rule yet. It felt like
all she'd done is she'd gone and spoke to the suspects.
That was it, yeah. She spoke,
that was it, yeah.
She spoke to the Vulcan, she spoke to the Klingon. All right, that went nowhere. I'm breaking the rules. Like that was it. That was the sequence of events.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough. It wasn't like, oh, now I've like received like a dodgy note that's threatened my life. I have to get to the bottom of this because things are at stake. You know, there was nothing to escalate it to make you believe that she was desperate to do it. You know,
she didn't really try anything else first.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of things about it that just don't feel like they add up to me in the story. It's like they really want to do this noir thing, so there's so many little shortcuts to just make it fit that, when not all of them make sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And again, I think you could have had her doing this on her own, but I think you'd have had to have sort of made it clear that Picard and co just don't think there was a murder, so she has to do it on her own. But we're in this weird middle ground.
Then it's kind of out of character for Picard to not believe her. So it's difficult.
Yeah. So it is it's a tough sell. I think trying to do this as a noir ultimately is just, I think, a flawed idea from the get-go. I think having her investigate the murder is completely fine, but try to frame it like a noir.
I think that's where the problem with, well, most of the problems with the script come from, is that decision. Presumably early on, that was this is the concept for the episode. It was Beverly doing a noir, and yeah, that just conceptually was where the problem started. Unfortunately,
it just kind of keeps getting in the way of like the logic of the show, if you will.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because it actually is nice to see her do something else and, like, you know, not just be the medical officer and not just like have dumb romantic plots. It's actually nice that she gets to do something else that she believes in, but unfortunately it's not that great an episode. There is that little moment where her like second in command, who I've seen a couple times this season actually, this is more of a recurring character now, sort of lets her into the files. I thought it was an okay little moment, just because we've actually seen this means something a little bit, because we've seen you a couple of times, so you're not just some random red shirt. You're like, okay, I recognize your face. And you even have the little moment where Beverly says, no, don't do this, you'll implicate yourself, and she's like, is that an order? Yes. Well, tough, you're not in charge because you've been taken off duty, so you can't stop me. I thought that was a funny little beat.
Yeah, they were nice little camaraderie.
Yeah, that was good, because she was in a previous episode getting dating advice, I think, from Beverly.
Yeah, she's popped up a few times, and obviously she has just a few little scenes at the start of this episode, kind of, just sprinkled throughout, just to remind us that she's there. I think even when Guinan visits Crusher right at the start, she's like, the other doctor's in charge right now. Go see them.
Yeah, I think if anything, the show could use more characters like this. These smaller characters who are recurring that aren't, effectively, the medical O'Brien, essentially. But
yeah, of course, it's essentially what O'Brien started as. Yeah,
of course, O'Brien did eventually get a couple of spotlight episodes, which is great to see. And then obviously he's now a main character on the other show. You don't necessarily have to do that with all these minor characters, but if she did get a Barclay style episode at some point, yeah, cool, whatever.
Yeah,
no reason why not. But so yeah, kind of a mixed bag of an episode. It's actually got a pretty decent rating on IMDb. It's a 7.0, which
surprising to me.
That feels a bit higher than I would expect, but hey, it is what it is. So next time we will be back with Deep Space Nine, which I'm looking forward to getting back to. We're getting later in season 1 now. I'm looking forward to getting to season 2 and getting to the real sort of serialized stuff. So that's exciting. But next time on The Next Generation, we've got an episode called Rightful Heir, and of course there's a photo of a Klingon. It's probably a Worf, actually. It looks different because he's got longer hair. So here's the description. of rightful heir. During Worf's crisis of faith on Boreth, Callus the Unforgettable makes his promised legendary return, but Klingon leader Gowron challenges his authenticity. This is a Klingon-heavy episode.
We had obviously a pretty heavy period of this at the end of, I want to say it was the end of Series 3, start of Series 4.
No, end of 4, end of 5.
Okay.
End of 3 was Best of Both Worlds.
Oh, yes, yeah. Obviously, we had a pretty healthy chunk of this stuff then, and we've dabbled since, but this feels like a return to that stuff, you know, in a real deep dive sort of way.
Oh yes, who can forget Gowron and his crazy eyes? He's got a stare that just eats into your soul.
He does have the crazy eyes, yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, no, that's next time on Next Gen. But as we said, Deep Space Nine is next, so look forward to that. But that has been our thoughts on this episode of Trek. So let us know what you thought of it in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. You can get us on the Twitter at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. And of course, if you want to support all the content and keep it all coming, you can go over to patreon.com/mailedfuzztv and support us over there. But that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek. And somewhere out there, Wesley Crusher has killed at least 17 people, and his mother's not even noticed.